Holy Spirit. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with you. Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Saint Rita, pray for us. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our class this week. I'm so sorry I wasn't able to have our class last Monday. I totally forgot to also send you an activity because I had a recording of my speakership for an ARSC Congress sa ato ang sister school. So, medyo sa hapon man ko nag-recording so medyo nadala ko sa task na I wasn't able to update you. But today we will continue what we have discussed last week. You had an activity on this. Others were not able to join our class, but I think it was Kay. Naglahutay until the end of the session. So our discussion last week was about discrimination or racial discrimination or racism and xenophobia. So racism and xenophobia are two different things. So although they had some similarities in some way, but they are also quite different when it comes to how people treat other people. So ang xenophobia is more on a person is afraid that a huge group of foreigners or immigrants ang mo-take over sa ilahang culture, nga ang ilahang own culture sa ilahang gipuy-an mawala na siya, no? Magmahadlok sila nga i-take over sa uban nga nasod or uban nga immigrants, most especially in America. Xenophobia is quite rampant. It is because, well, you see a lot of Hispanics, no? Or mga Latinos, no? Or mga Asians or other nationalities going to America to seek for greener pasture. So makabantay ng Americans nga daghan kay gatapok nga lain og nationality. They're afraid that their culture might be taken over by other cultures. Okay? Para sa lang kita gud as Filipinos, mahadlok ta nga atong gina-preserve nga Filipino culture mawala na because of Western influence, no? Because there are a lot of mga foreigners nga mag-agto sa tong lugar. That's xenophobia. Ang racism is more on how you treat a person, and sometimes it can have a bit of prejudice, no? Sometimes that is where prejudice comes in. Pero di masarang panahon nga prejudice pud ang reason for racism, no? Ang uban is due to ignorance, no? And of course if they see someone nga has a very strong culture and is not like them, no, they would feel very indifferent. So that is where racism comes in. So that's what we discussed last time, no? And I think we finished the first part of racism and xenophobia, and then we also had a short clip lang nga gipakita in order to further explain what is xenophobia and racism. So what is xenophobia and racism? So we'll now proceed with prejudice, no? So we cannot cover discrimination in just one class, no? We had to explain further, and last time I was so careful in discussing it because I am not an anthropologist, no? I merely research for information about discrimination, racism, and xenophobia, but I am not the right person to totally, explain or have a comprehensive or a thorough explanation about this. So that's why, we look at other researches and also mga informational materials lang for us to fully understand why this happens, no? And how can we ilisod ko siya i-prevent maski moingon ta nga kanang I will talk more about this, ma'am, or I will treat others fairly, or I will treat others the same way. Well, dili man mo totally address ang racism with just one action, di ba? Dapat it has to be a collective action, no? A collective cause. So mabitaw na nga you see rallies or campaigns for Black Lives and All Lives Matter, no? And we see people, still advocating, still talking about it, and it's not just one person. Okay? There's a lot of them. Kay in order to spread awareness and as well as inspire others to this cause. So this afternoon we're going to proceed with the topic of prejudice and discrimination. So prejudice, usually the discrimination and racism actually stems from prejudice. So many prejudice. Kana ganing i-judge ni mo daan ang person without actually, understanding, or let's say giving that person a benefit of the doubt. This is quite common among Black Americans, wherein they're always, di ba siya yung stereotype, no? Kanang i-judge din sila nga na siya bati nga intention, or just because he's a black person, he is dangerous. That's prejudice. Okay? Ang stereotyping is, para sa anak, you don't trust this woman mechanic. Although, naghatag na prejudice daan kay mo siyang gi-judge nga dili niya kaya, but that stems from stereotyping. Because you stereotype, di ba? If we go back to age, kanang gender, not age, gender equality na to nga topic, nga gina-stereotype ang babae nga dili nila kaya ang makaya sa lalaki, nga kana panlalaki na nga trabaho, nga they are meant to be inside the household lang. So kanay mong prejudice, it stems from stereotyping. Because imo nang gi-stereotype daan nga ang babae dili niya kaya dili niya kayang lihukon ning mga panglalaki nga trabaho, that's why you don't trust her. Then mo na ang prejudice na ang result ana, because you stereotype women to be, hinhin, nara sa balay, things like that. Okay? We see a lot of those themes, in movies and books, tanan. Sir ni mo na makitaan. So prejudice is not just within gender, feel po na siya within races, An example of that was a Black American who was just standing in front of his apartment, Unya, of course, mga police, malagi na police brutality, we do not want to generalize nga bad jud ang police, but others sometimes they take advantage of their power, and sometimes these people in uniform are very racist, and then they see Black Americans as a threat to society, masking dili man sila tananing ana, marag na dayo stereotyping and prejudice na tabo ba. So he was just standing in front of his neighborhood, niya sila nga apartment, and then gikap-kap siya. So of course yang first niya nga since gi-interrogate man siya, gipangutana siya, ning kap-kap siya sa iyahang bulsa. So of course, because of prejudice, the police thought that he would be, or the Black American will take out a gun. So what they did, wala pa gani nang kuha ang Black American sa iyang kuhaon sa bulsa, gipusil na siya 41 times. Okay? So if you're just going to incapacitate the person, you're not going to shoot them 41 times. But because of racism, because of prejudice, because of stereotyping Black Americans to be harmful or a threat, so gipatay nila 41 times. It's a hate crime na. Okay, you can't do that if you're just going to defend yourself, diba? And ang nabala na di ay nga naa siyang bulsa is mukuha na siya siyang ID para ipakita sa mga police nga he's a law-abiding citizen, or he has like identification with him. Kaya gi-interrogate naman siya. Out of the blue ra good nga gikuan din siya. Daghan kay na i-search niyo sa YouTube kanang mga Karen videos. They call mga marites ito sa gawas og Karens. It's a form of stereotyping Japon nga. Tanan Karens ko na ana kanang racist, irritable, always call the manager, equivalent sa marites ito sa Philippines. But you see a lot of those, Americans nga funded sila mo harang din sila sa mga Black Americans nga mo labay raw, wala ra gibuhat, masuko din sila. And I'm not meaning nga tanan jud nga white Americans are like this. There are also respectful white Americans class, And then sometimes sila pod ang kanang ma-victimize, So in short, others would try to segregate. There are other people who are so ignorant when it comes to culture and are not culture aware that they tend to segregate people according to their color and physical appearance. But in fact, nga parehas naman tatanan, We do share the same earth, the same air. Of course, it's expected nga maglahi-lahi jud ta because we live in different climates, we have different ancestors, nya lain-lain jud ta nga ko ano, and that's how God made us. He made us um different, no, and hopefully out of that difference, no, nga we will still paano kanang we'll still treat each other the same. So muna, that's where racism comes from. So let's try to understand further prejudice, discrimination, kana kong ipang storya. Now, for those who just joined karon nga session, I did explain last week why it's so important to understand discrimination, prejudice, and racism, because in our industry class, again, no, we will be meeting a lot of different people. Some of them are foreigners, or even gani atong mga katrabaho are from different nationalities. And if you have prejudices within you, you will not be able to work harmoniously with the people around you, just because you have this prejudice nga kani nga person palayo ka kay kuan ni sila kanang sa tawag ni kanang threat, or for example moadto ka sa kanang mga brown Asians, mo silang stereotype as, or kanang mga Muslims or Indians, mahadlok din kanila just because they look different from you and they speak a different language. So we have to learn to be not only open-minded, but you have to be acceptful, to be accepting. So ban ako and also you also need to be kuan pod class, no, culturally aware. Ako katong ginaingon-ingon ako ninyo nga, dili na mo gawas ang out of ignorance, dili na mo gawas ang Islamophobia, racism, kanang white supremacy thinking, no, nga kanang just because puti mo or ikaw ang kano kanang feel nimo na nakay superiority complex, no, dili na mo gawas tanan because you're so ignorant to what is around you. You feeling nga kamura inyuhar nga culture, inyuhar nga race ang mo matter, diba? Para sa gunang recently, diba, na ato yung mga footage sa mga Indians nga magluto sila street food, kita hugawan tano kay magkinamot sila, dili sila ka-afford og mga kutsara, ma'am, unya kuan di ay to, no, it's part of their belief di ay class kanang nga para nila ang hand is sacred, it has like mystical powers should, no, pero sa tawag kanang nalimot ako sa let me verify. I want to tell you like the exact word of kanang unsa ni siya nga teaching. It's in Hindu, it's part of Hinduism teachings nila on Let me just share this first. Dili ko katulog kay gusto na ko i-share ang exact shit nga ko okay, it's Sanskrit mudra or symbolic gestures of the hands and feet. There's the other one. Fundamental teaching nila when it comes to dance. That's why they paint, they have henna dyes in their hands during special occasions class. If you look at like kanang cultures sa mga Indians, even gani before marriage, like they have this kanang marag tradition nga they put like a sticky paste to the face sa mga babae, no, marag to bring them prosperity sa ilang marriage, no, sa ilang future. Limot ko sa kuan. It's in the tip of my tongue. So they feel that hands are sacred. Kita mo ingon ito nga kang damak or kuan. Na maskra mo pud to ilahang kuan. Nato siya exact, it's not na maskra. It's another. They have 7 sacred teachings manggod regarding to their hands and feet. That's why they always dye it kanang makita nimo na siya class if you Google it, no, you see them during like silahang mga festivals, sila mga red nga sun nga painted on their hands. Una pa mi kay chakra na unsa naman ko ang daot na sa koan. Kaya naman siya healing powers. Oh, I forgot na that terms. Gina ko guna-huna unsa to siya. Lang, I will just get back to you on that. Diyo katulog, no? I want to share that with you because ito rin ako nabalaan nga amao di ay nga they don't use spoons or kanang kita no kung magtimpla ta sa pagkaon kanate mga serving spoons or kanang mga ilan kon kamot ilang ginagamit because they believe that their hands is sacred and it has kanang murag di man siya divine mystic powers or something like that murag healing abilities or something. That's why when they feed kanang pagkaon nga ilang ginahimo, it has to be with their hands. Although for us it may seem unhygienic, but it's part of their culture. And if we do not understand that, of course there is prejudice na. So maning mga kuano yung mga damak, hugaw, luod kayo lang taon. Sa tuwa manggod, dili manggod na to siya. Kuan, custom. That's why we don't understand. Pero sa ilaha, it's in their culture. Okay? So, muna, that's where prejudice comes from. That's where racism comes from. You are ignorant to the culture and even unsa jud siya as a person. So muna natabo pod class. So even kanang mga hijab di ba gitudloan ta mo ana nga ang hijab is a sacred clothing. It's self-preservation. So when you wear that, it means that you do not want your skin to be exposed to other people. Kay tungod nasa inyong tinudloan nga it could just, invoke lust or kanang desire sa uban. So, mo siya ng tabunan. Mara po siya habito kung sa mga madre, pag mga tabunan, dyan, mabitaw nang naaibelo ang mga madre, no? Because the hair is the crowning glory. It adds attraction to your face. That's why they hide it or they cover it because to make sure nga walay mo desire nila because of their kanang ilang hair or ilang appearance. May ana. And also, there's another one. Kana pong sa tawag ani kanang sa mga Africans when they do ritual dances nya natoy kasagani pod nga kanang sa fashion show ni Rihanna no ang music dito is from a sacred prayer sa mga kanang Arabs no nya dili na siya pwede himuon og pang runway song nga lingerie pa jud. I mean, I respect Rihanna because she has she values inclusivity. Like I really like her in the beauty community. Like I like her as an artist ning shine pa siya samot when she had her own clothing and makeup line because she embraced inclusivity and girls with different shapes from different shapes and sizes, di ba? Lain na sila ko na lingerie nga even for people like us nga dili kay appealing og figures, di ba? Like it's empowering, but sometimes you have to also consider cultural appropriateness. Like, she can make use of other songs, not just katunga chant sa Arabic nga wherein it's a prayer. No, unya, kuan ka nang gapaso sila wearing lingerie, no? And it's not appropriate. So, muna, you have to be really careful with culture. Nga, dili lang basta-basta or recently lang, I don't want to involve. There have been a lot of kanang mga mockings na online about mocking different cultures, indigenous cultures nato here sa Philippines, and also kanang mga Muslim brothers and sisters nato. So again, no, we have to educate ourselves, not be ignorant when it comes to that, so that we can understand. So that is where prejudice comes from, jud class, no? Because we don't understand things, or we stereotype people nga, ay basta babae siya, ing-ani ra siya, or kay lalaki man siya, dapat ing-ani ra siya. No? Stereotype, or discriminating mo siya because of ignorance. So, muna. So, let us proceed with prejudice. Defines it as a racism. Since we are talking about racism, prejudice, and discrimination. Okay. So, racism is universal. It does not only exist among white Americans, no? But, nanas tanan. Even kita mismo class, we experience racism as well. No? Even gani during katong sa pageant season pa no nga kita na naman jud ta sa balay. So pag gusto ra jud ta og scroll sa FB, sa social media, and social media became very toxic. Especially I did not expect Instagram to be toxic as well. Like Instagram is like may safe haven sa una no nga kung mapuno ta sa toxic sa FB dira ta kon kay mga pictures raman, but they became so toxic and up to the point nga very racist na even fellow Asians are hitting on other Asians. So racism does not only exist within Black Americans and Americans in general, but tanan. It exists across cultures. There is even racism among Africans nga it's dangerous to be a mix white and black, or for example mix American and masyag black American ba pero ka ng light skin gani magpares ka Beyonce nga kind of kuan nga light skin. It's dangerous sa there's a certain country in Africa nga it's dangerous to be kanang mix ka nga American no, kay not only nga kuan no, not only nga ibuli ka, i-harass jud ka. So it exists everywhere, not just mga katong ko na ang good nga mga kano rang mga racist kay mga kano ma'am kita tanan no, because we are fueled by prejudice no. We immediately perceive someone as like this because we don't understand them, so that's why we judge quickly. So it exists in all cultures, class. Even Asians do that, di ba? They even kaya nang ko ano uban basta magsungod ka sa lain nga culture because of their culture, that's racism already. Okay? So, it emerges where there are perceivable differences among groups struggling for social power. So, even there is a conflict sa different two groups in Kenya, sa Kikuyu and Luo, nga wherein there is also racism. When they know nga you are from a Kikuyu nga tribe, you will be harassed, no? So, or naiuban gani nga mabalaan nga mao ni ang imuhang tribe na belong maskin pares sa mo itsura, para sa mo og skin color, language parihas ra, i-harass ra Japon ka, no? I-discriminate ka because of that. So racism is everywhere. Now, when we talk about prejudice, it's about a negative, inaccurate, rigid, and unfair way of thinking about members of another group. That is according to the study of Diller and Moule in 2005. So, when you have prejudice already, meaning wala pa lang gani jud ka ila or kasalimuha ani nga person, nanadayon kay mga judgment, no? And it's a normal human emotion. I don't want to be self-righteous and say it's wrong, it's kuan nga noon sayop jud nga mag-judge ta una, but it doesn't mean nga dili kita tanan gabuhatan na. All of us has experienced making prejudices against another person. Pero ang pinakagrabe jud, class, is kanang when it includes racism na jud. Okay? So racism is a mixture of prejudice and power that translates into behavior of the majority that impacts the object of the prejudice. So sometimes racism can be so strong, most especially if the person nga very kanang ganing racist jud kaayo siya, has power or has superiority, plus giparis pa siya og prejudice. So grabe na nga racism ang iyahang mabuhat sa usa ka tawo. Racist remarks or racist actions. So racism is broad and pervasive in all levels of society and has 3 levels. That's why I keep telling you nga this is a very sensitive matter, and I have to be really careful in explaining this one because I did not study anthropology, but I did have like a bit of a context what racism is. Later on, I will also show you videos to help support my discussions so that you understand better, because it's so broad. Others would take years. Sometimes this is their main main na nila nga focus silang dissertation, labi na inut kaayo ni siya, class, kung maghimo kag qualitative study, because you're taking the personal accounts and personal experiences of the people are experiencing this kind of situation. So it's really broad, no? Lisod jud kaayo siya, like i-capsulize lang within one sitting. So it has been divided into 3 levels. You have individual racism, actions of individuals that support racism. Okay? Like, angay naman po di kuan na sila, kay dili man ni sila taga diri. Matagalaing kuan man ni sila, tagalaing nasod. Angay ra po na sila iharas. Mo nang individual race. You support the actions of other people, especially nga, or even support racism. For you, it's a good thing to harass people because of their race, no? Next is institutional racism, manipulation of societal institutions to benefit the majority and restrict the choices, rights, mobility, and access of others. Okay, ang institutional racism class is para sa ng rich and poor. Okay? You manipulate the system in order to cater to the rich, which can restrict the rights and choices of the poor and even access of the poor. Okay? So that's institutional racism nga mamahalo nimo ang kuan nga maka-afford ani mga basic necessities kay ang mga dato sila rin mo tagaan nimo priority and access. So ang mga pobre tawo no luoy kaayo kay dili matagad. Unya they will have a loss of access, rights, and choices to have the same kuan po no treatment sa uban no kay tungod gimanipulate naman sa system sa babaw ang entire process, no? So that's institutional racism. Racism can even exist between socioeconomic status, no? Kung maglaylay yung socioeconomic status, racism exists, or discrimination, no? At that. So next is cultural racism. Cultural ways of one group that are superior to another. So para nila ilahara nga culture ang magmatter, no? Sometimes you hear this one from Americans nga maingon nga you are in our country, you have to speak English, or kanang invalidate ang imuhang culture just because it's not pleasant to them. Or para nila sila ra ang ilahara nga culture ang dapat mag-exist, or ang laing tao ang mag-adjust sa ilaha because of their superiority complex. Okay? So that's cultural racism. Nga this is inappropriate for you to do this kay wala ko naanad ani nya para sa iyaha kay it's paano her action is acceptable because for her that's how she expresses, let's say, joy or happiness, or para nimo murag lainan ka kay kung kanaanad no lain man iyang culture, that's why imuha siyang i-invalidate or imuha siyang usbon, no, or dili nimo dawaton or imuha siyang i-ridicule because of her display of culture. Okay, so that's cultural racism. So people tend to deny, rationalize, and avoid discussing their feelings and beliefs about race and ethnicity. It is hard to look at and talk about race because there is so much pain and hurt involved. Starting pa lang daan sa pagkon sa mga Europeans no when they traveled to Africa because they had to seek a different route no kay sirado man to ang other nilang agianan, so they had to choose a different route when it comes to the Spice Islands no, and other islands in Asia, so they had to go through Africa no, and along the way no ilahang not only gipang colonize nila but at the same time they kidnap natives in different parts of Africa and they sell it to America as kanang belongings, no? They treat people there as merely things to own, no? Kanang rags of slavery, di ba? And also kanang dili sa tagag basic human rights, no? Patrabahoon sila nga walay bayad-bayad, dili pa kanon og tarong. So an example of that is the Atlantic slave trade, no, that is the most pinakagrabe nga Euro-American slave trade. So mo na siya class nga they exchange the lives of these innocent people in Africa para lang makakwarta, no, and sometimes even families ginapa-separate kay baligya sa lain-lain nga household. Walay respect for human life because they treat these people as merely belongings, no. They answer to one master, no. So ing ana mara pud siya kung sa Pilipinas class mara pud siya encomendia system, no, kanang forced labor nga walay bayad. Mga encomenderos, they own a piece of land and the people in it are also their belongings. So the people there need to work for the encomendero or ang Espanyol nga nagitagaan og yuta, no, dira. Unya, ang exchange daw kuno is protection, pero I doubt no if tinuod ba jud na. So, mo na no, it's difficult to talk about race and ethnicity because it just brings so much pain, and it's not only about the Atlantic slave trade class. Even until karon, you see a lot of hate crimes, not just towards Black Americans but even in Asians. So recently lang nakadungog taog news, diba, tong hate crime nga Filipina to siya kay tungod ituhan nila nga Chinese, para nila tanang mga Asyano parihas ra. Okay, so it's sad, no, but there are strong people out there that would really be brave about talking about their history, about their race, about their ethnicity, because they want to share awareness. At the same time, they want to let people know nga there are also people too nga dili pod sila in town nga kanang pasakitan ra because they look different. Okay, so they also fight for inclusivity, they fight for equal rights. So why is it easy to develop and maintain racial prejudices? Okay, it grows out of human traits because kita no kana ganing mag-judge tadaan sa atong nakitaan nga tao. It's because when we meet someone or when we saw someone, automatically ato siyang i-analyze dayon kung unsa siya, no? Because it grows out of suspicion, about categorical thinking, like yung mo sa i-categorize, is this person like same with me or not, no? So one could comfort with similarity, like they find comfort if they see people that are similar or share same traits to them. So when they see someone that is out of their comfort zone because this person is not similar with them, and this person raises suspicion, that's where prejudice comes in. Okay, labi na when you see someone nga has a strong personality and is very loud and it doesn't, fit to the kind of values, at the same time the kind of person that you are, nya mag-judge din kayo someone ni siya, uy kuan mo kaayo ni siya nana ba, no? Nya labi na lahi pa kay siya now, there and then na mag-stem ang prejudice, no? It can also stem out from stereotype of categorical thinking, katong ingon no nga nag-prejudice dayon, naghatadi kag prejudice dayon sa katong babae nga mechanic para nimo iya siya, dili niya kaya kay tungod babae siya, no? Murag kay salig mo kay salig ninyo kay babae iya kaayo, prejudice na ka. It's stem out of stereotype because you stereotype women to be weak, no? To be in the household ra. O dira po na magikan ang prejudice, okay? So, in reality, there does not seem to be a single theory that can adequately explain the impetus towards racism in all individuals. Okay? So, tungod yun na sa authoritarian personality, para nila na sila yung murag superior complex, and they want to achieve a certain economic, that's why para nila no, kaning mga tawhana is a threat to whatever it is that they want to build. Or for example, they have frustrations and aggression towards these people because they are ignorant. Like, I don't like this person, or para to sa ko nga, no, because you're so ignorant about their culture, suko na lang ka, or di ka ginaha, no, and you make unpleasant comments. Okay, so before tamo proceed, let us try to understand further what is prejudice and discrimination. So, let us try to look at a crash course video. Okay? Mas maayo nga a person who did thorough research on this can further explain the context of prejudice and discrimination. So, let me just share my screen. I would like to also encourage you to watch Crash Course. This has been like ko ana dyan no kanang companion ako ever since I started teaching TED Talks and TED Eds. It has been there before ko nag-teach, no. Kay I'm really into educational videos. Kay isa kadaghan og kanang mga maot og content sa YouTube, kana ra jung productive nga content ang mo matter. So kani siya dili ni siya built on hoax because Crash Course is a reputable and credible source of information about psychology, about science, about history because
For example, in 1937, only one...
sorry. The people involved here are not only psychologists, like for example, you see Hank Green. If you are a fan of adult or a teenage fiction, kung kita na po mo sa lida nga, The Fault in Our Stars ba to? The Fault in Our Stars. Diba, it is adapted from the book The Fault in Our Stars, same name, by John Green, diba? And then katong sa po to, Finding Alaska, paganito lain. Sa kanang mga teenage books, some of my students read that. Sa ko nga time, sikat ka na si John Green. So John Green is an author, a renowned author, fictional romance or contemporary romance books. His brother, Hank Green, is one of the people nga nag-manage aniyang TED Ed and TED Talk is a compilation of different mga experts like in the academe, businessmen, doctors. Kani siya, kuani sila, no? Author, same na po sa TED Ed o TED Talk, educational video siya, compilation of sources from psychologists, from doctors, from academics. So si Hank Green is kuan siya kanang he has a degree in biochemistry and a master's in environmental science. So his forte is more on the sciences, but he also touches on psychology because he has also a degree in psychology, no? So hindot ni siya usually gani sa mga classes na mo sa logic. I also take examples like for example altruism or nihilism, kanang may ana nga mga theory sa logic. I always get my ideas or even kanang just to enrich my mind from Crash Course. So muna ko mga highly recommended for you guys so that kanang murag at least bano kanang daghan mo ma-learn during your extra time. So either TED Ed, TED Talk, Crash Course philosophy, Crash Course history, Crash Course literature, daghang klase. Okay? Because as young as you are, even ako, no, I'm a very young person, I consume information very quickly, and usually it's easy for me to retain information if it's like this, if it's presented like this one. I read other articles but it doesn't really retain in my memory, but it's helpful, but it takes a lot of time, registering in my system, in my brain. So that's why I would really prefer you would also do this, no, may ani nga kuan. So kanina din sila mga basta-basta lang nga YouTuber class, no? Ako malingaw po ko nila ni Paulol, kanang ana nga kind of YouTuber, but some of them I don't really consider them as references in my class because it's for entertainment, no? It's not educational. That's why I choose this. Oh, di ba? Nag side story. Okay, I shared this one to my senior high school class. Karon man graduate na sila college, no? Sila ni Natalitan, and hangtod karon, no, they watch videos like this one because I think I've shared this during my MIL class po, no? Okay, so let's try to understand prejudice and discrimination under Crash Course Psychology. So medyo paspas mo tabi si Hank Green because like me, he is also suffering from mental dyspepsia. Like if I talk slowly, it would be difficult for me to continue, the flow of the discussion. So medyo paspas siya, but there is like subtitles sa ubos, so para you can understand and catch up, no? Paspas lang tabi si Hank Green. So brother ni siya ni John Green.
In February 1999, 4 New York City police officers were on patrol in the Bronx when they saw a black man standing on a stoop. They thought he looked suspicious. When they pulled over, he retreated into the doorway and began digging in his pocket. He kept digging as the police shouted at him to show his hands a few seconds.
Let me just, I think I sped the video. Para masyag chipmunk siya. Normal raman di ay. Masyag chipmunk yung tingog. And he is also diagnosed with ADHD. That's why he talks so fast. I don't know if I have ADHD, no, pero dili man siguro. Pas ko mo tabi, kitabian ko. O, diba? Share ko lang. Okay, so try to watch this video for you to properly understand the concept of prejudice and discrimination and how it's a serious topic that we need to understand. Appreciate yun na to siya. Okay?
In February 1999, 4 New York City police officers were on patrol in the Bronx when they saw a young black man standing on a stoop. They thought he looked suspicious. When they pulled over, he retreated into the doorway and began digging in his pocket. He kept digging as the police shouted at him to show his hands. A few seconds later, the man, Amadou Diallo, a 23-year-old immigrant from Guinea, was dead, hit by 19 of the 41 bullets that the police fired at him. What Diallo was reaching for was his wallet. He was going for his ID as he stood on the steps of his own apartment building. Diallo's story and the officer's fatal prejudgment of him is recounted in Malcolm Gladwell's 2005 bestseller, Blink. Gladwell and the social psychologist whose work he draws upon explores Diallo's case as an example of that gray area between deliberate violence and an accident, propagated by non-conscious or implicit biases. The officers did discriminate against Diallo, but the prejudice they acted on may have been driven by something more subtle than simple hatred. And that's an important thing to think about. Yes, there are lots of overtly bigoted people and policies at work all over the world, but what we're interested in today is the more insidious, non-conscious, automatic bias and how it can affect our behavior. The fact is, our implicit biases affect the way we relate to others in a very real way. Our race, gender, age, religion, or sexual orientation can make the difference between whether we get a job or not, a fair paycheck or a good rental, or whether we get randomly pulled over or shot and killed for reaching for a wallet. In the last 2 episodes, we've examined how we think about and how we influence one another. But social psychology is also about how we relate to one another. Like what factors might cause us to help another person, or harm them, or fear them? What are the social and cognitive and emotional roots of prejudice, racism, and sexism, and how do they shape our society? These are some of the aspects of ourselves that are the hardest and most uncomfortable for us to explore, which is why they're so important to understand. We've all been unfairly judged in our time, and let's not pretend that we haven't done our fair share of uninformed judging too. Like it or not, prejudice is a common human condition. Prejudice just means prejudgment. It's an unjustified, typically negative attitude toward an individual or group. Prejudicial attitudes are often directed along the lines of gender, ethnic, socioeconomic status, or culture. And by definition, prejudice is not the same thing as stereotyping or discrimination, although the 3 phenomena are intimately related. People may distrust a female mechanic. That's a prejudicial attitude, but it's rooted in a stereotype or overgeneralized belief about a particular group. Although it's often discussed in a negative way, stereotyping is really more of a general cognitive process that doesn't have to be negative. It can even be accurate at times. Like, I have the stereotype that all crows have wings, injuries and birth defects aside, and that happens to be true. But on the negative end, your prejudice against female mechanics may be rooted in some inaccurate stereotype about women's skills with a socket wrench. And when stereotypical beliefs combine with prejudicial attitudes and emotions like fear and hostility, they can drive the behavior we call discrimination. So a prejudiced person won't necessarily act on their attitude. Say you believe in the stereotype that overweight people are lazy. You might then feel a prejudiced distaste when you see someone who appears overweight. But if you act on your prejudice and say refuse to hire them for a job or don't let them sit at your lunch counter, then you've crossed over into discriminating against them. The former apartheid system of racial segregation in South Africa, the Nazis' mass killing of gypsies, Jewish people, and other groups, and centuries of bloodshed between Protestants and Catholics are all extreme examples of violent prejudice and discrimination. The good news is that in many cultures, certain forms of overt prejudice have waned over time. For example, in 1937, only 1/3 of Americans said that they'd vote for a qualified woman to be president, while in 2007, that figure was up to nearly 90%. But of course, more subtle prejudices can still linger. In the past, we've talked about dual process theories of thought, memory, and attitudes, in that while we're aware of our explicit thoughts, our implicit cognition still operates under the radar, leaving us clueless about its effect on our attitudes and behavior. In the same way, prejudice can be non-conscious and automatic. And I mean, it can be so non-conscious that even when people ask us point blank about our attitudes, we unwillingly or unknowingly don't always give them an honest answer. Do you think that men are better at science than women, or that Muslims are more violent than Christians, or that overweight people are unhealthy? Our tendency to unwillingly unwittingly doctor our answers to questions like these is why we have the implicit association test, or IAT. The test was implemented in the late 1990s to try to gauge the implicit attitudes, identities, beliefs, and biases that people are unwilling or unable to report. You can take the IAT online and measure your implicit attitudes in all kinds of topics, from race, religion, and gender to disability, weight, and sexuality. It's basically a timed categorization task. For example, the age-related IAT looks at implicit attitudes about older versus younger people. In it, you might be shown a series of faces, old and young, and objects, pleasant and unpleasant, like pretty flowers versus a pile of garbage. You're then asked to sort these pictures, so you'd press the left key if you see a young face or a pleasant object, and press the right key if you see an old face or an unpleasant object. That's the stereotypic condition. Your keystrokes correspond to stereotypical pairs, in this case associating good stuff with youth and bad stuff with older age. Then the test asks you to do the same thing in a counter-stereotypic condition, pressing the left key if you see a young face or an unpleasant object, and the right key if you see an old face or a pleasant object. The core of the test is your reaction time. Are you faster at sorting when you're working with a stereotypical pairing than you are with counter-stereotypical pairings? If that's the case, even though you may think you're unprejudiced, you've got an implicit association between youth and goodness, which, as you might guess, may have some implications about how you think and act toward older people. The test is widely used in research, and contrary to what some critics think, it's surprisingly predictive of discriminatory behavior in all kinds of experimental settings. So that's one way to measure subtle implicit prejudice, but obviously overt prejudice is far from dead. That's why discrimination studies are prominent in social psychology research, and they can also predict, sometimes with scary accuracy, how discrimination might show up in broad social patterns like wage inequality and job opportunity gaps. For instance, a 2012 study led by Yale social psychologist Corinne Moss-Rakusin demonstrated that science faculty across the country systematically discriminated against female science students. In a double-blind study, a representative sample of science faculty members were asked to hire a fictional student applicant for a lab manager job. When the applicant's name was Jennifer instead of John, they viewed her as less competent, were less likely to hire her, offered her less money, and were less likely to mentor her. And this prejudice was even exhibited by women faculty members. And that's an important point. People on both sides of the stereotype tend to respond similarly, with the subjects of prejudice themselves often holding the same stereotypical implicit attitudes or engaging in the same discriminatory behavior. So when we say that stereotypes are pervasive, we mean pervasive. Now, it's all too easy to hold up examples of how people are prejudiced, but the real root of the issue is why they are. Here are a few possibilities. For one, prejudices can come up as a way of justifying social inequalities. This happens when people on both sides of the power and wealth spectrum start believing that people get what they deserve, and they deserve what they get. This is called the just world phenomenon. Prejudices can also be driven by the us versus them, or as social psychologists often call it, the in-group-out-group phenomenon. Whether you're in a soccer stadium or the political arena or school lunchroom or, in the comments of this video, dividing the world into in-groups and out-groups definitely drives prejudice and discrimination. But an in-group identity also gives its members the benefits of communal solidarity and a sort of safety in numbers. This in-group bias, or tendency to favor your own group at the expense of others, is powerful even when it's totally irrational. One common social psychology exercise on in-group favoritism involves dividing a class into two arbitrary groups, say those wearing sneakers and those not wearing sneakers. Each person sits with his or her group and is told to list the differences between themselves and the opposing group. The lists usually start out pretty tame, but become more strident as they grow longer. Eventually, you have sneaker-wearing kids saying that they're just smarter than the people without sneakers, or kids who don't have sneakers say that the others are trashy and low class. Soon enough, each group has inflated itself and derided the opposing group, even though the division between the two was essentially meaningless to begin with. Little exercises like this illustrate the power of any in-group out-group distinction in creating conflict between groups, and that brings us to the psychological nature of conflict itself. History is littered with examples of how the us versus them mentality has fueled violence and warfare, which is exactly what we'll be talking about next time. Today you learned about how prejudice, stereotyping, and discrimination affect how we interact and relate to one another. You learned how prejudice can often be non-conscious and automatic, and how tools like the implicit association test help reveal and measure it. We also looked at the implications of the in-group-out-group phenomenon and how it can lead to strong in-group bias that often turns aggressive. This episode of Crash Course Psychology was sponsored by Shane Barr, whose young adult sci-fi adventure book, Reset, is a...
Okay. So, medyo paspas yun ang talk ni Hank Green, but he mentioned how prejudice can change how we treat people, and it can also be non-conscious. No, sometimes kita we commit prejudices towards one another without actually meaning it, and others, well, narid sila inner hate nga kuan dyan, no? Kanang naana jud na siya, and that's their basis of how they judge other people, no? Because they don't like what they see, no, it does not fit to what they usually see. Para nila it's different and it's scary, mariana ba? So there actually, the theme of prejudice and racism has been so long been talked in different kinds, even in literature, okay? And until karon ga exist pa rin siya, class, no? Mobitaw na nga nanap ko injustices among sa mga black person or hate crimes sa mga Asians, and the only thing that atay butang, no, makagaan-gaan ani nga kind of situation is just like gender stereotyping. We don't stop talking about it, and it has to be a collective effort, no? And it has, ang uban gani, even sa themes sa movie, like there are movies right now that empower people of different races, and there are also movies depicting the what's tawag na kanang injustices and violence in racism and discrimination. Okay? So I want to hear your thoughts first before I will continue. What are your thoughts on prejudice and racism? Like, how does it affect you as a person? Even if you haven't experienced siguro, or if naka-experience mo, pero how did you feel, no, knowing about prejudice and racism, and how this happens around us? I would like to ask Dos. Is Dos around? Or online na siya, wala na minaw? Dos. Oh, natulog guro niya siya. How about Angel? Anyone? Hello? Sulod ra mo klase, or ako rao sa gatabi sa computer, wala jud ko'y katabi in actual. Nakuan. Kay stop na to ang class if you're not actually listening. So for Kay, who wasn't with us earlier, no, I've shown a video about how prejudice came to be and how it is the root of sometimes discrimination, no? Because when we judge people without actually understanding them first, it would eventually lead to stereotyping and sometimes to racism. An example that I have mentioned earlier is you don't trust a female mechanic because you've stereotyped women as weak and incapable of doing a man's job. So that led you to have a prejudice that you don't trust a woman mechanic. No? And prejudices are innate na siya, class. Kana ganing human nature na siya nga dili man na siya something nga mapugna nato, no? It's inevitable, but it becomes racist na when our prejudices are towards a hateful kind of judgment nga we don't allow people to even be as people, no? Like katong example, no, sa video nga pinakauna nga gi-present sa video ni Hank Green nga katong Black America nagtindog lang siya sa iyahang apartment, dayon ay niaging mga policeman, then na prejudice ang policeman nga kani siya threat to society ang mga black person or suspicious siya, so ilahang gikap-kap, ilahang gi-interrogate, no? Ikap-kap nila if na yung mga weapons masking wala, no? Nga kaning black person, Black American, ning igo na siya ning kuot sa iyahang bulsa, giposil na siya 41 times. So, if you're meaning to just incapacitate a person, kay para nimo kanang gatuo ka nga naa siya weapon, dili ni mo na po sila og 41 times. So that's already suspicious already. That's a hate crime already because you really see this person, no? Kanang nili only hate lang siya, pero you see this person as a threat or a dangerous person, masking not really knowing unsa jud yung real intention, gipusil nimo siya 41 times. That's overkill already, no? And kuan class kanang iya na ding igor siya ning kuot siyang wallet to show his ID, and he died, no, in a pointless way because of racist nga actions or thoughts, or because of prejudice. Okay? So, sige lang, no? Katong naulahi na may recording ani, so you can go back to this. And racism has always been there ever since the course of time, diba? We did made mention of the Atlantic slave trade. It started with the Europeans nga they traveled all the way to Africa because, you know, they wanted to choose a different path. They traveled to Africa, they kidnapped natives there, and they brought those natives to America to be sold as slaves. So kaning mga slaves, they are stripped of their basic human rights, meaning anak class, no, kuan sila baligya sa lain-lain nga mga tao, Americans, and then sometimes are separated, no, from their family. So that's how, you know, awful the history of racism. And it doesn't only exist between Black Americans, no, or Americans. So it happens in every community or nation. Katong mention ninyo no nga, it's dangerous for a mixed African to live in Africa. Mabito no nga gipa-adapt dito siya. Itong story sa lalakin sa to siya nga case ha. Ito siya nga case. It's a true to life story wherein this reporter adopted a mixed Black African because of a certain case po niyang gi-cover. Unya ang natabuan ni is gipaada kasi siyang mama kay tungod sa Africa napud sila racism dito. Even if par sila color like Black, no, African sila tanan. If naa diray mix nga like American and African, mixed blood siya. So, Black American no. Then, light skin pa jud. Like, person nila ni Beyonce og color, nga very light skin nga African American. So, it is dangerous in that kind of country sa Africa. It is because, kuan siya class, no? Napod sa discrimination dito. Okay? So, dili siya ga-exist between whites and Black American, no? So, asa ka. Even gani sa Asia. Okay? So, na ay power play, no? Sometimes, there are superpower countries in Asia nga they discriminate katong mga emerging pa lang nga countries. So, it exists around us. And even gani class, no, in order for the fight against racism and prejudice to stop, no, kay lisod kaayo siya class. Mas kung saan na to educate sa ubang mga tao, it's easier to fool someone than to teach them that they were fooled. No? That's according to Mark Twain. And lisod kaayo jud siya i-eradicate. But again, no, I'm happy that we live in a generation that we are now comfortable talking about this. Kay tungod sa una, lisod kaayo siya istorya, kay it is a history full of painful memories and hate, no? Kanang you're stripped off with basic human rights, you're treated as if you are like livestock ra or belonging, no? Dili ka i-treat as human person. So there are some examples how people even in the past class, no, there are literary works even that are fighting against racism and prejudice, no? One of the popular examples is Uncle Tom's Cabin, no? That is actually the inspiration of Jose Rizal for him to write Noli and Il Feli. So ang theme, no, sa Uncle Tom's Cabin is about slavery, slave trade sa America, and the treatment of humans as property. They wrote that book because they would want for people to be enlightened to be aware nga this is an important issue. Kung bito na ako na nangugat na akong tabi diri, kinahanglan jud na istoryahan class because it's happening around us. Kita dili man gud ta ka-appreciate because it doesn't affect us directly. We are so blessed because we are living here in San Carlos City, free to do whatever we want. And if na mga ginagmay nga prejudices, it's not as hurtful as na-feel atong mga people like Asians in America where they experience hate crime nga gibunog jud sila, gipakauwawan. Okay? Halos pat yun. Or the Black Americans nga, mo para sa tong sa laki nga gatindog lang sa, she's an actual person, no? It's not the work of fiction. Gatindog lang siya or para sa mga uban nga mga Black Americans sa dungan may lang story, di ba nga, walay injustice sa pagpatay sa ilaha. Nga, gipatay lang sila diha just because of racism and prejudice. So, Uncle Tom's Cabin actually inspired Jose Rizal to write that because it also initiated it helped lay the groundwork for civil war, no? And kuha na siya, no, kanang murag, it's an awakening or kanang murag pamata sa mga tao nga these injustices are happening and it's not humane. Okay? Another example, pinaka-popular dyan nga madunggan nato nowadays, no, is To Kill a Mockingbird. So To Kill a Mockingbird, not a political agenda kind of story, ha, but if you try to understand the main themes of Mockingbird, it has three main themes, no. It surrounds around prejudice, particularly racism, justice, which people are judged based on their innocence sa ilahang skin color. So if you are black, you're not innocent. If you're white, you're innocent because you're always depicted as pure. 'Di ba katong video nga nakita ni Kay, I don't know if kamo nakakita pod mo no katong sa doll, tong doll nga test nga asa diri ang ugly nga doll, asa diri ang bad nga doll. Permit jud towards katong dark-skinned colored nga doll. Okay? So it's about prejudices, justice, good versus evil, no? So it's where innocence is decided based on your skin color. That's To Kill a Mockingbird. So just to summarize it, it's a story about a girl named Scout and her brother Jem. So iyahang papa is a lawyer, si Atticus, no? And then nag-question sila permis sa iyahang papa. And marapod siya kanang magpars po ako sa una ba nga how I came to know about the injustices in our country and also how unfair life can be is because of the stories that my parents would tell me and even what I see sa akong surroundings, no? And that's what happened in To Kill a Mockingbird. Like, it's a coming of age nga kind of story nga. Na-realize nila ni Scott and Jem nga the world is unfair. It's full of prejudices and it is willing to, let's say, kanang ikuan niya ang innocent na person just because of his skin color. So, sa To Kill a Mockingbird nga story, si Scott and si Jem are brothers and sisters. Gi-ask nila yung papa because si Atticus, silahang papa, is a lawyer that is assigned to a black man. And this black man is falsely accused of raping a white woman. And meaning, that black man is innocent, no? Innocente siya, but just because of his skin color, he was then accused of a crime he did not commit. And gipanigan dayon ang white woman because of her skin color. Masking kaning kaayo ang babayi nga puti, no, siya Japon ang gipanigan kay tungod una kuan man kanang racism, prejudice, no? So dito na realize sa mga bata nga justice differs from the actual law, no? And sometimes life can be unfair, no? Racism is happening around them, so they're namulat ilang mata to these kinds of themes, no, because of the story or the discussion nga naa nila sa iyahang papa, no, nga si Atticus. So that's an example as well of literary works that is trying to, let's say, kanang ipamatata sa realidad. It may be a work of fiction, but it's not as far as to reality. So, even in Il Fili and No Limitang Hiri, siguro you are forced to read that piece of literary work because it was a project, but if you truly understand the meaning behind il fili and noli, you see a lot of injustices there. Okay? Na dili fair ang sistema, no? And there's also discrimination nga natabo. Okay? So muna siya, those are just examples on how we can help spread awareness on how important it is to not stop talking about prejudice, about racism, about discrimination, because it affects our community. It may not affect you directly, but it doesn't mean nga it's not your fight. Muna akong ginaingon jud class nga, just because you've experienced, let's say, conveniences or kanang murag kuan ano, happy ra ka sa imuhang life because you haven't experienced this kind of injustice sa imong kinabuhi, doesn't mean you do not fight for it, no? Because we live in one community and one usa ka planet, no? And kuan na no, kanang if no one will stand up for it, then who will, no? So muna sa I'm trying to teach you about this kinds of themes because sooner or later you will experience, siguro subtle lang, you'll experience this kind of situation in the workplace where you are judged because of your skin color. An example, di ba katong video kung ipakita ninyo sa inyong activity, nga Filipina nurse siya, wala siya gisaligan because she's Asian. Well, that's prejudice already, di ba? Kung ninglantaw mo sa entire video. And it's hurtful because kanaganing gilower ang paglantaw sa imuha just because of your skin color. Nga you're not being seen as a human being capable of so many things because gi-judge na kadaan sa laing tao. And this is important not because matabo ni siya sa tuwang industry only, but ikaw in the community, it happens. Okay? So, dapat aware po ta. Dapat pwede magpabulag-bulagan sa ingani nga kay kani siya class no, gender stereotyping, discrimination, racism, and also what they call this, prejudice. Sunod mo, kuan na po ta, mo touch na po ta on sexual harassment. Okay? Nga, it's not the fault of a woman to wear the kind of clothing where she sees herself that she is empowered with it, and also kanang kanang for self-expression. So, mar kanang we will be talking about the argument between, is it the fault of a woman? Why kanang is it because nga gasulob siya gnubong nga sinina nga ga-invite siya og kanang sexual harassment? No. Storyhanay po ta about ana. It's important in the workplace as well. Okay? So kaya na nga mga themes, no? So this happens around us, not just in the workplace. So I do hope you're able to understand. It's almost 4 p.m. no? Still need to talk about inventory management and operations management. No, we keep on holding OM behind because we need to focus on multicultural. No, nasa sa itong discussion on multicultural, but I do hope you're able to get some of that, no? And hopefully you try to understand its importance. Okay? Now, I would like to ask, a feedback from both of you, no, on your take on racism. What is your take, no, your opinion, or let's say, what is your reaction ng paglantaw sa racism, prejudice, and discrimination? And how does it affect you as a person? Masking wala ka naka-experience anak, pero ikaw makakita ka, makadungog ka anag mo yung anang story, how did it affect you? Okay, let's start from Kay.
Kwandam. Today dam kay ang racism ug mga prejudice ug xenophobia dam kay dili na jud bitaw kayo tantong lala bitaw dam, although ga-exist gyapon siya dam, pero at least karon ang mga tawo dam nanabitay knowledge ana dam, pero gyapon di gyapon di gyapon bitaw malikayan bitaw dam kanang mainana bitaw nga part ng para lang atong very recent lang jud kayo dam katong sa video na gipakita dam katong nurse kay because of Asian siya, kay siya sa Chinese or something kay mao ang gakos sa virus. So kanang sa ito pangutan ni dam nawala mo. Dam.
How do you feel about, learning all of this, like as a person?
Kwandam kanang nice dam kay even kanang nakabalo na ko sa meaning sa racism, sa racism na inana pero mas ni elaborate pa bitaw jud kayo bitaw da mas ni broad akong understanding sa inana nga kanang nga klase nga topic dam na inana.
Thank you so much, Kay. Now let us ask Dos.
Ako Adam is katong sa sugod dam sa racism dam katong video nga gipakita nimo sa activity dam katong sa nurse ug katong sa mga Chinese dam kay sad kaayo dam nga kanang na-encounter to nila nga panghitabo dam nga dapat dili man gani dapat na mahitabo kay kanang wala ta kanang pariharat nga mga tao dam nga dapat equal pero ang ilang mga ilang mga na experience to is lala kaayo dam ka nabot na sila sa point nga na trauma ang mga Chinese nga naadad to dam niya og kanisa prejudice dam kay ang reaction ako sa kaningat sa tanan dam kay nga mas maayo po dam nga karon dam nga generation nga open na o pwede na kay ni siya i-discuss dam nga dili ta mahadlok kay kasanuna og gina-open dam kay usap og ka sa i-judge dam kay nganong mo supa ka sa ila nga og anang ilang attitude nya isa daw.
Okay. And then, how do you feel, Dos, when you learned about this, that it's happening around us, and there are, sugod pero sa pinakasugod, no, nga there are people that are fighting for this, for equal rights, not just among Black Americans, but sa tanan. How did you feel as a person? Like, kung mo na-feel when you learned all of this?
Kuan dam kanang mas makasabot bitaw kadam about ana dam mas better po dam nga mas daghan makabalo nga mas na sila knowledge about ani dam para malikayan po nila ang iana nga mga kuan dam nga situation na sa tong Black America na makita mo kana sa video basit nga kuan siya gipusil siya nya wala pa siya wala pa sila kabalo nganong unsa to ang iyahang kuwaon sa bulsa niya o ibutang ka bisata na sa kita tanan ibutang ato sa sitwasyon ato nga dili pod be alalim munang dapat ang mga tao dam mas makabalo sila sa nga mga topic dam.
Okay, thank you so much, Dos and Kay. So it's true, no, we have to really know about this because the more we learn, the more we free ourselves from the ignorance of other cultures and ato ang paglantaw sa laing tao, the more we can be able to understand. And what else? Actually, daghan even katong sa Starbucks nga naglingkod ra gani sila kay na sila hulaton nga friend nanawag na dag police ang tag-iya. Or di Starbucks but a cafe, I think, no. Nanawag na dag police ang tag-iya. That's prejudice already, pero kung puti maghulat sa iyang friend ito sa cafe, okay ra, no? So it's very unfair, no. It's sad that we live in a world ngayong ana. And maski like dili man siya nato siya, di man siya parehas sa una nga grabe kay lang slavery, but still, no, it doesn't mean that other people aren't suffering. So that would be the end of my discussion on prejudice and discrimination. Hopefully we can still continue kay I had a lot more slides pa on this so that we can proceed with sexual harassment na. So appeal na po na sa to ang mga babae nga is it our fault to begin with kung mauherta og kuan. So we will try to understand and unravel that kind of issue so that we can be able to also discuss among ourselves, no, if how do we stop sexual harassment and men objectifying us as sex symbols, or pwede na tabastuson just because of what we wear. So we're going to do that one in the next meeting na. Okay? So your finals exam will be scheduled sa May pa. So we still have like the entire month of April to go. You have any questions before tayo proceed sa next subject? You will just consume 30 minutes on the next subject. Questions?
Wala dam.
Okay. So it's already 4:03. Let's have siguro 5-minute break. Let's come back at 4:08. So, there ako mag-leave, no, arira ko, so that we can continue with inventory management and operations management. Okay?